All right. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is not going to be on streets. This revolution is not going to be on Facebook or Instagram. This revolution is not about burning cars. This revolution is mostly in the mind, because every time when we descend on streets to protest, we make demands. And by making those demands, we imply that some of the important resolutions to our problems must be done by an outside force. And we deny somewhere, somehow, our responsibility and our commitment to make the change that we want happening in our lives. That is why within the ACUP, which is the African Continental Unity Party, and the Free-Minded, we want to train African people who see themselves at the center of the change that they want, so that we don't go down on the streets to ask for people to provide employment for us. Because the same way they can provide that employment to us is the same way they can take it back from us when the conditions change. So as we are not based on demanding, we are based on thinking, bringing forth what we want, or creating for ourselves anything that we want, for our better lives. So once again, peace and power, freedom and decolonization. My name is King Kabbalah, member of the African Continental Unity Party, and I am engaged in the communication team of the African Continental Unity Party. Now, this is our first class for the year 2023, where we are dedicated to train the executives of the ACUP, or generally leaders who will be responsible for Africa tomorrow. So even if you are not wanting to become politically involved in the affairs of Africa, or in the affairs of your own colonial enclosure as it is the current setup, you may be willing to become a leader in the business. You might be, willing to run a business, to run your company, and therefore you need leadership skills. And that's what we provide here. And our focus is to create leaders fit for business leadership as well as political leadership, as we have explained, because that's what we believe to be the right and the left leg of every nation, and that's what can keep us in balance. When we don't have strong leadership politically speaking, and we don't have strong leadership business-wise, we have imbalance in which we find ourselves today as African people. You are a witness to the reality of Africa today. That is why the Free-Minded Pan-African Academy and the ACUP aims to rebuild Africa as a global base by firstly building the people who will be in charge of Africa. Because when we're talking about building Africa as a global power base, the first thing that comes to mind is an African man, an African woman, himself or herself, need to be rebuilt, need to be reconstructed in their mind, so that they can create for themselves the Africa they want. In other words, we can create for ourselves the Africa we want. That is why we have this program, because for us, we don't believe that development is all about building roads, building highways, coming up with the industries. If the people in that community are not developed, that is not a development, because development is always a process of inside out. It begins from inside. It begins from inside and is based on the education, because education itself, the word education itself, the root meaning of the words in Latin means educo. And the word educo simply means to educe. That means to develop from within, to take what is inside of you and bring it outside of you, so that you can shine in the society through that light which is inside of you. So education is all about educing, like developing from within, and that is the proper word of develop, the proper meaning of development. We cannot develop ourselves by expecting that the so-called investors will come and build the roads for us, build taller buildings for us, and build industries, and therefore Africa will be developed. No, Africa will be even more underdeveloped. So we need an African man, an African woman to be fully developed and equipped with all the tools necessary for his own mastering of his own situation, for mastering his own situation. So thank you very much for your time. This is going to be our first lesson, as I said, which is based on Pan-Africanism. Because you see, every people have their own worldview. Every people have their own way of looking at the world, understanding of the world, and conceptualizing the reality of the world. European people will have their own worldview, which is mostly based on individualism. The right of an individual is more important than the right of a community in the European perspective. So, us as African people, we also have our worldview, our way of looking at the society, which may not be equal to the same way that European man and woman considers his or her own society. And there's nothing wrong with that. Diversity is a part of nature. Diversity is a part of natural order. So we need to understand who we are and to embrace what we are. So now, when you talk about European people, they will tell you their political and economic ideologies, which of course help them to achieve their status, their comfortability, which they are enjoying now. And most of their ideologies are based on exploiting other people. By the way, we are here, first of all, to talk about what is our ideology, because for a long time, I think we have been criticizing other people, what they do, how they do that, but we rarely came up with our own ideas of how the world is supposed to work. We rarely came up with our own ideas about how we should see our society, functioning. So I think ACUP is really doing closing that gap, is doing us a very good service for having people who think about what kind of ideologies, what kind of philosophies, what kind of ideas we can come up with. Because when you look closely, most of the political parties that we have in Africa today, you will see that they are all working within the framework set up by the European, by the Caucasian. They are coming, talking about what change they want to bring in our lives, how good life they want to bring to us, how employment they want to create and stuff like that. But what is the framework? What is the basic philosophy they are, basing their activities to create those changes that they want? They are mostly working on the capitalistic philosophy that has created so much misery, so much precarities, and so much suffering in the masses, in most particularly the African masses. So we have our own ideology, and this is not something new, of course, by the way. It is something that Marcus Garvey was working on, something that Kwame Nkrumah was working on, something that Thomas Sankara, something that these our ancestors have been already working on. And ACP comes not really with something new. It's the very same agenda of 1963 at Addis Ababa that was betrayed by some sellout African leaders like Ufebwani and others that we are actually pushing. But we have just tried to find a best way to do it so that we can avoid the setbacks that affected these movements or these ideas in the past. And we'll get to that at a later stage, of course, in maybe another lecture obviously focused on the ACUPO political leadership. But what we want to speak about today is simply the Pan-Africanism. And for us, Pan-Africanism is the key that we have at this particular moment to develop Africa. And as I'm explaining, you will come to the understanding of why only Pan-Africanism is the idea, or is the key that we have at this moment as African people in order to develop Africa, not even develop, first of all, to free Africa, to liberate Africa, because as ACUP, we believe that the first thing that Africa wants at this moment, or needs at this moment, to be precise, is her liberation. Only after we have managed to liberate Africa, we can now talk about development, because there's no way for you to talk about development under the conditions of subjection, oppression, and domination in which we are today. So it is impossible. So it's only when you free yourself, then you can now deploy yourself, you can develop yourself, you can emancipate yourself and achieve the highest purpose for which you have been created. So Pan-Africanism, what do we understand when we talk about Pan-Africanism? Of course, there are various definitions of Pan-Africanism according to who looks at Pan-Africanism. But for us, as far as we are concerned, Pan-Africanism simply means the unification or global unification of African people for a total liberation of Africa through scientific means. Actually, I am going to share my presentation with you here so that you can see what I'm trying to talk about. Let me try to see. How do I share my screen? Got it. So this is what we are talking about. Now you are able to see what we are actually talking about. So Pan-Africanism. When we talk about Pan-Africanism, we are looking at the agenda of global unification of African people for a total liberation of Africa through scientific means. Now, let's firstly try to analyze this definition. Global unification of African people. Why global unification? Because we have, first of all, what the enemy did on Africa was to divide us. As you know, the best way for you to conquer a people, you must divide them. Now, we have some of us who find themselves in America, some of us who find themselves in Europe, some of us even in Asia, and the rest of us in Africa. So sometimes we don't happen to see the relatedness that exists between us as African people. Even though the enemy who looks at us, he looks at us in the same way that he looks at African person who lives in the United States as a Negro, who is supposed to live for the entire of his life under the authority and the domination of the Caucasian man, is the same way that he looks at some of us in the Africa, on the continent, and in the same way that he looks at our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. So as Marcus Garvey was fighting for, as Kwame Nkrumah was fighting for, as all the great Pan-Africanists were fighting for, the first and number one agenda of Pan-Africanism is to unite African people globally speaking. We don't have to leave our brothers and sisters in Caribbean out of this salvation agenda, out of this liberation agenda, because they are also oppressed as much as we are oppressed on the continent. Those in Asia, they are also oppressed as much as we are oppressed on the continent. So for Africa to be free, we firstly need to unite or to unify the global family of African people from wherever we are. You see, you need to consider Africa, for example, as a cow, not as a chicken, because you see, a chicken, you can take a part of it, a piece of it, which is the egg, and the chicken will stay alive. But if you want to take a piece of a cow, you're going to have to destroy the whole cow. You have to kill the whole cow. That is the reality of Africa. You cannot destroy a part of Africa and leave the entire continent alive. Once you see a part of you, an African community, whether in Haiti or whether in Mayotte, in the Caribbean, wherever we find ourselves to be, When you see an African people being attacked, being diminished, being undermined, being degraded, or being destroyed physically, morally, or psychologically in anyhow, it's an attack to the entire family of African people. So therefore, for us to make sure that we have a chance to succeed on this agenda or on this request of African liberation, we need to unite the global African people. Your plight in America is the same plight that I'm suffering in the Congo, in Nigeria, in Ghana, is the same plight that, that our brothers and sisters are going through or are facing in Haiti, is the same plight that our brothers and sisters are facing in Asia. So basically, the agenda of of Pan-Africanism is to unite African people, globally speaking, for the total liberation of Africa. Now, this is very important, because in most cases we talk about unity of Africa. We don't contextualize the term unity, and many people don't understand what is the meaning of the unity of Africa. Because today, let's say today, we can come together. We can say, okay, let us dismantle all the borders that we have on the continent, the borders that were created by our oppressors. We destroy all the borders today. The next morning, there won't be change of all these problems that we have in Africa, these problems of poverty, hunger, unemployment, all these things, right? These things created by the worst for Africa. They won't change, even though we can dismantle the borders today. So when we talk about African unity, it's not just a matter of coming together and live together face to face or side by side and now greeting each other. Hey, my brother, hi, my sister, how are you doing? That is not going to change our reality. When we talk about unity, that unity should be a unity of purpose. It means we must bring some goals that will attract all African people so that we can work together. And by working together, we'll be able to achieve our collective desire. Let's say, for example, when you have a bunch of dogs scattered all over, the place, sometimes fighting each other, each one looking in a different direction, as we are now in Africa. What you want to do, if you want to bring them together, you take a piece of meat and put it there. All of them will come together around that meat to eat, or whatever food that you've put there to eat. And that is the moment that you create the unity of that bunch of dogs or chickens or whatever else that can be used as an example. So it is the same thing as us African people currently. We are scattered in different ways. We have some of our brothers who want to become little British because they were colonized by British, and they feel proud to be part of what we call the Commonwealth. And they say, we are part of the Commonwealth. You see, we have some of us who are proud of being little French because they were colonized by French, and they will tell you that as we are, part of French zone and stuff like that. All of this is a level of mental distraction that an African person has gone through, that he doesn't look himself that he can come up with something worthy of its name. He must always belong to other people's institutions for his own survival or his own existence. By that means, in that sense, he undermines the purpose for which he was brought on this earth. So when we talk about unity, we talk about unity of purpose. It means we must find what are the common goals that we have as African people, or what are the common objectives that we have as African people. Those common objectives or eventually will be built on the common problems or common difficulties that we have as African people. And something very interesting about Africa that you can keep in mind is that we share, no matter where we are, in Caribbean, in Haiti, in Africa, in Asia, in Mayotte, in Guadeloupe, in whatever place we may find ourselves, we share a common past. That common past is that we are the descendants, direct descendants of the greatest ones, the pyramid builders, the ones who brought civilization to human being, right? We are the descendants of those people. Our ancestors built civilization. So we share that past in your blood. If you are an African person from wherever you are currently, no matter where you were born, if you are an African person, in your blood flow the genes of those who built pyramid, those who created the first human civilization. So this is very important as much as I am. All of us, we share this, history. And coming from that history, we share another history also of slavery. African people, we were totally destroyed and enslaved. If you are in America today, it's because your ancestors were dropped there by the slave ship. If you are in England, it's because your ancestors were dropped there by the slave ship. So if I am here in the country that I can call Congo or South Africa, it's because my ancestors were colonized and put in a colonial enclosure that is called today the Democratic Republic of Congo, or South Africa, Nigeria, or Niger area, or Ghana, or whatever else that you think is your country. It was a creation of your oppressor as a colonial enclosure in which you are supposed to live. So you see, we share this common history of destruction that Africa has gone through, and we are sharing the common present whereby all the efforts by Africa or by Africans to develop Africa are being undermined by international institutions created by the Caucasian man in order to keep his position of superiority over the rest of the people, and most particular African people. So we are sharing the same plight today of white supremacy under which we are subjected. We are facing, sharing the same plight today of racism at all levels, collectively or individually. So we have the same problem today, and the same way that we have the same past and the same present, it means that we also have the same future. We can build the same future. So when we talk about unity now, in this sense, it's unity of purpose. We need to form collective goals inspired by our common history and our common plights. And currently, the only thing, or the major thing that every African person needs is liberation from imperialism, from white supremacy, from whatever form of imperialism, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's neo-colonialism, whether it's, globalization, whether it's capitalism. We must get rid of all these isms in our lives by becoming free. So this is a common goal that unites us. So when we form this objective of liberation, now we begin to work. Every African person, those in diaspora, those in Africa, when we begin to work around these goals, we achieve what we call unity. That's where the unity of Africa means, because many people in Africa like to talk about unity, but they are unable to put their money to invest in things that can give us collective power. How can you talk about unity if you are unwilling to spend your money for things, for goals, for objectives that will give us what we can call collective power as African people? That is impossible. Coming together like this will be just like a bunch of animals that one single lion will terrify and destroy. But if we understand that the concept of unity does not mean necessarily coming together, dismantling all the borders, and then living together and greeting each other every morning, then we'll understand that the unity that we're talking about is unity of objectives, unity of purpose. It means we must form collective goals and work together around those goals and achieve them, and then we'll be able to rise as people respectable or respected, and people who deserve dignity and respect in the world. That's what unity means. So coming back to the definition of Pan-Africanism is an agenda of global unification of African people. We come together with our money, we come together with our resources, we come together with our energy, we come together with our skills, our experience, our expertise, our time, and most importantly, to work for the liberation of Africa through scientific approach or scientific means. Remember how I started my presentation? I said this is time of revolution, but this revolution is not going to be on the streets. Mostly we think that we can liberate Africa by some kind of riot, some kind of mobocracy or whatever else we can call it. No, that is not how it works. The forces that we are facing are the forces that have worked in scientific means to keep us in the conditions in which we are today. You know, there are some think tank groups that are working 24 hours to think or to obviously anticipate any move that African people can make to liberate themselves. There are groups that are working every day, right, discussing on how they can keep Africa in condition it is today of destruction, slavery, and servitude, where the only place reserved to an African man is that that space or place of kicking a ball and dancing and singing, nothing else of significant importance to the world, right? So we must understand that they're working scientifically. And even if you trace the history of slavery, as we said, you must understand that slavery was indoctrinated into the Africans scientifically. There was a process that was called scientific means or scientific process of making a slave. Through this process, black women who were pregnant after they have been forced to copulate with other men so that they can get impregnated in masses, they were taken in a yard, like hundreds of them, and they took like 10 of them out of them, hanged them to a tree and cut the womb, and the baby fell down on the ground, and the slave master would take his boot and crush the head of the baby in the sand, and forcing the remaining women who were pregnant about giving birth to see that scene, to observe that scene. And that terrific image was actually imprinted in their memory and transferred to the memory of the young children before even they were born. And when they were born with pure fear of the Caucasian man, and they were terrified about the image of Caucasian man. And that's how you see today this kind of reverence that we have in Africa today towards the Caucasian man, not because he is superior to us, but because he used a scientific method to enslave ourselves today. You see, so that we are happy to give white man's name to our children. We are no longer being forced. Before we were beaten up to do that, but now we are willingly give the white demons, names to our children. You see, and we are proud of speaking their languages. I personally was beaten up in school every time I spoke my home language. It was because they wanted to indoctrinate me to speak French, and today it's difficult for me to interact with some people in my home language. I'm actually fluently speaking French than some of my home languages. See how distracted we are. So the point is, we also need to use scientific approaches to liberate Africa. We won't gonna do this in a haphazard manner. We are not going to do this by faith. We are not going to do this by prayer. We are not going to do this by hope. We must do this by scientific means. Means we must study the world in which we are living. Science means knowledge. Science means knowledge, right? Not faith. You cannot free Africa by faith. See, Chinese don't have a Christian faith. Chinese don't have Islamic faith. They use knowledge. They use knowledge to invent technology, to invent things that your pastor now will go and buy and put in a church to deliver you, while those Chinese who made them, they went to pray to Buddha. I mean, they didn't even have to pray. They just actually believe in Buddha, right? And they make this plastic chase that your pastor who delivers the demons of Buddha uses, because whatever prophecy that he has doesn't give him the wisdom to create or to invent those kind of stuff. Let me put that aside. But what I'm saying is, we cannot liberate Africa with hope, with talk, with with discussion alone, with debates, or with too much knowledge that cannot be applied. We must liberate Africa with meaningful and realistic actions, pragmatism. We must, if you don't know what to say, if you don't have skills, bring your money into an organization that's have skillful people that are working, tirelessly for the liberation of Africa, because without money, we cannot achieve anything. Really, we cannot achieve anything. For me to speak to you as I'm speaking to you now, I need to have a professional camera. I need to have this mic. So money is spent on this thing. So imagine if we don't have the means, we cannot reach out to you and to other many people that we are reaching out to you to for the liberation and emancipation of Africa. So we must liberate Africa through scientific means. Now, I took a long time to explain, first of all, the definition of Pan-Africanism, right? There are a lot of things we can talk about Pan-Africanism. And at this moment, we must understand that for us as African people, Pan-Africanism, it's a global, it's, how can I put it? It's an entire ideology that governs or that include economic approach that we need to use, that includes political approach that we need to use, that even can go deeper into a spirituality or spiritual approaches that we need to use as African people. And when we understand in depth the idea of Pan-Africanism, we will not gonna be willing to look outside to borrow any concept, whether that's be spiritual or economic or political, because Pan-Africanism got everything that we need as African people now to free ourselves. That is why I started by saying that Pan-Africanism is the key that we have at this moment in order to liberate Africa. Now, quickly, let me run through certain principles of Pan-Africanism so that it makes more sense. I've already explained by definition only the basic philosophy or premise of what we call an African idea. Now, talking about some principles of Pan-Africanism, there are many anyway, unlimited, there are many. But in this particular presentation, I'm going to discuss a few principles: the principle of African identity, the principle of African unity, the principle of African solidarity, the principle of African self-determination, and the principle of African relatedness. When we understand these principles and put them in practice, we will be a step closer to embark into our liberation as African people. Now, starting from the first principle of African identity. Identity is everything. You see, Marcus Garvey said that the first and fundamental rights for every human being is the right to know thyself, is the right to know who you are, the right of your own identity. Because when you know who you are, then you understand your place in the midst of other people. And by understanding your place among other people, you will easily understand your role among other people of the world. It's very important. So when we talk about African identity, is that the first thing that we need to understand is that we are African first before we are anything else. You see, today you belong to a lot of things that you choose to belong to, and that you can decide to renounce tomorrow or after tomorrow, right? You belong to a particular religion in most cases. Africa is 80% religious, either in Christianity or in Islam. All these are religions that we choose to belong to. And sometimes we think that these religions are now the true identity of who we are. But you can decide today or tomorrow to stop being, Christian or Muslim or whatever religion that you trying to follow. Today, you can decide to stop being Ghanaian and adopt another nationality. You can stop being Nigerian, South African. It's gonna happen, right? And these are all identities that you sometimes, somewhere, somehow chose to belong to. But one thing that has been ascribed to you from birth, sealed and set from the day you were born, from actually the day you were conceived, something nobody can take away from you. Even yourself, you cannot deny that identity is your African identity. You see, if you're born today, if you die today rather, nobody will know whether you spoke Zulu, Shangani, Twi, Igbo or Yoruba, any language that you can think of. Nobody will never know if you spoke those languages. Nobody will never know if you were a Congolese. There's no difference if you die today. Nobody will never know if you were Congolese, you were Nigerian, you were Senegalese, right? Nobody will never know if you were Christian or Muslims and stuff like that. But one thing that will stay alive even after a million years is your African identity. Your bones will still gonna identify you as an African person. This is who we are. So being an African person is actually divine. It's something that you cannot run away from, because it's something that nobody gave you. It's something that it's set into the nature of things, how things are supposed to be, from the creation. See, you are an African, and we need to embrace our African identity. We are running away today from our identity as African people because we don't know the meaningfulness of this identity. We're running away because we have been already psychologically destroyed to look at African identity as something of backwardness, and to look at Europeans' identity as something of advanced, of modernized. Therefore, we want to portray ourselves as little French, as I spoke earlier on. We want to speak better French, like French people speak. We want to speak better English, like Britain people speak, like British people speak. We want to speak, better Portuguese. We want to do all these things by trying to run away from our true identity, which is African identity, even though sometimes we don't know that we are running away, because there are two levels of ignorance. There's one level of you knowing that you don't know something, but there's another level of you don't even know that you don't know what you don't know. That's a level at which many African people are today. That is why it's easy for you to disapprove your own ancestors, for you to ignore them, but to know much about Jewish ancestors and to link yourself to the Jewish ancestor, to Jewish lineage, right? It's easy for us to do that. In most cases, Africans call themselves descendants of Abrahams, of Jacobs and stuff like that. But do you know anything about Imhotep? Do you know anything about Ptahhotep? Do you know anything about Akhenaten? All these ancestors who today you can find their graves, their tombstone, because you cannot show me the grave of Abraham. You cannot show me the grave of Jacob or all these people. Anyway, I don't say that they didn't exist, but I'm just saying that there's no a grave, physical homes where these people were buried, but you have ancestors who really existed, who built pyramids, who built civilizations, who did things that changed the world. Imhotep, the true father of medicine, was actually worshipped. There was pilgrimage at his tombstone for about 2,000 years after his death. Some kind of 1,000 years after his death. Do you know that? You don't know that? And in most cases, if you are too much into belief, blind belief, as I'm speaking now, you're getting angry. What do you say like that about Abraham? You say like he's a father of faith. It's good, it's good. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that, but do you also know something about your true ancestors and what they did? You see, this is because we trying to link ourselves to other people because we feel like being African is not enough. Being African, it's degraded, is kind of a degraded status of being African is backwardness. So we need to always add something else from other people who we believe they are closer to the divine, closer to God, so that we can feel complete. That is why it's easy today for a black person to, when he has an opportunity, to marry out of his race, because he feels like what his parents produced was not enough. And every time he has an opportunity to create himself, he will make sure that he recreates himself in something that is different totally from what his parents created, because he hates that identity. But something that you don't know is the African identity is divine, because it is the only identity that can wipe out of the world other races. You see, those who study biology, they know this, that the black skin is dominant, the dark skin is dominant, and the white skin is recessive. Many people have spoken about this. Recessive means weak, dominant means strong. So you as an African person, male or female, you can take an Indian woman, you can take a Chinese woman, you can take a white, blue-eyed European woman, or man, vice versa, and you will reproduce yourself through them. So, and I'm always believing that the bottom line of racism today, even though it has taken much of economic dimension, but it has to do also with the realization by white people that if they let black people come together, in interracial kind of intercourse, they will be wiped out of the earth, and the world will be filled only with the black people as it was originally before the Caucasian appears some 20,000 years ago. So you see, so African identity is divine. So you as an African person, you can even create a lighter skin than yourself. If you go to South Africa, a community that is called the Xhosas, you see, sometimes you find some women there more lighter than the white people, and you wonder exactly who are these people. So we as African people, we have the power to destroy genetically other races and to recreate ourselves in any color you can think. No white person can give birth to a black person. Never. It doesn't happen, right? Because no dominant skin can come out of a recessive skin. I mean, no dominant entity can come out of a recessive or a weak entity. It's only a strong entity that can create or give birth to a recessive entity. That is why white came from us, but we didn't come from them. They came from us, and you can still create whiter, than yourself. So this is to say that we are running away from the divine power. These things that are related to our skin that you don't understand. And when you think about the universe, you think about the reality of life, one thing you can agree is that the mindset behind the creator of this universe, whoever he is or she is, and as John Henrik Clarke said it, I don't have a problem whether it's she, right? So when you're trying to analyze the back of his mind, the planet Earth was created mostly for a darker skin, because everything worked to give or to feed the darker skin, the sun, the main source of energy and the source of life in the world, without which nothing can survive. It feeds more into black skin, darker skin, than it does for a lighter skin. That is why Caucasian have to run away from the sun, but you need the sun in order to give yourself those vitamins, those melanins that you need in order to build your biological capabilities to fight against diseases and stuff like that. So your identity is divine. Don't be ashamed of being African. I'm speaking all of this because I want all of us in unity to lift our feet up and say that we are African and we are proud to be Africans. And I want us as African people, as John Henrik Clarke, our great ancestor said, we must wear our black skin as a badge of honor, not as a badge of shame. Even though the system, the setup of the world today makes you look like you are a degraded personality, but in reality, you are divine. You are the God yourself. You are so powerful, so we need to embrace our identity. So this is what actually the first principle of Pan-Africanism says. We belong to one family, which is the African family, no matter where you are. And that is the first identity, the first principle, which is of our identity as African people. And number two, related to this principle of identity, is the principle of unity. You see, it becomes unity when we begin to understand that we are all African people. We all have the same identity. as African people. When I don't look at you as a Congolese, I don't look at you as a Nigerian, I don't look at you as a South African, I look at you as African. You see, because Nigeria was not created by an African person. Congo was not created by Africans. Senegal was not created by Africans. All these colonial enclosures were created by our oppressors with one M, to keep us in check and to oppress us easily. Because for you to dominate a wonderful people as Africa, you need to be able to divide them first. So you see, in Africa today, we have a lot of Afrophobic tendencies. It means fear of other Africans or hatred of other Africans. It's easy today for African people to take 5 liters of fuel to light up another African person simply because it doesn't carry something that is called a passport or an ID book, which is created by foreign powers, by other people, by the oppressors. You see, for example, when you go to the Congo, there are 2 Congos, by the way, Congo Brazzaville and Congo Kinshasa. These people, they speak the same language, they have the same culture, they have the same ancestry, but it is easy for one to burn another one alive simply because it doesn't have the ID book of Congo Brazzaville, for example, if it is in the Congo Brazzaville. Today, you have people in Zimbabwe who speak the same language with the people in South Africa, right? Where they speak about Ndebele, there are those who speak in Zulu, there are those speaking Shangani, vice versa. But it is easy to ban another one simply because it doesn't have a ID book created by our oppressors. So this identity, this color of me as an African people is not enough to identify myself as part of you. So this is where unity must come, by understanding that we are one. We have the same identity. It is easy for us to look at ourselves as African people and to unite. And remember, I spoke already about unity. It's not about just coming together now and, dismantling the borders and stuff like that. No, it's about now finding the ways to unite our little resources and build strong institutions in a way, in order to serve Africa from the current and future imperialism that our children may not be able to survive. That is what the principle of unity means. And let me put this in correct context. So you see, in 2016, African nations individually, when you bring all the money they spent for military budget, it was about 42 to 46 billion US dollars. That in 2016, I don't know for now. And this money, in most cases, when you look in Africa, there's no a country that is strong enough to stand even against France, against Germany, against those European countries who control the reality of Africa. But we spent 42 to 46 billion. Should I tell you what is the problem? The problem is that this money was spent for individual interest of the head of states, so that they can drive in armored vehicles and live a comfortable life, have like 50 bodyguards and stuff like that, right? And build strong, buy some expensive weaponries to give to the police so that they can oppress the common people who we are as African people. If this money, however, was dedicated, for example, in unity, because this money was spent individually by each country, if we can now bring this money together under one budget for the continental army, do you know how powerful Africa will be getting for 1 year? And we do that the next year. Do you know how many equipments, how many tools, we can build, we can acquire in order to deter the intention of the enemy against Africa? We can do a lot. 42 to 46 billion can do a lot, can buy a lot of things in order to protect not one individual country, but the whole Africa. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, all these individual weapons that we are buying, spending a lot of money so needed for the development of our people, for creation of jobs and stuff like that, we spend this money for individual national army to fight against What country do you think that Congo will really be able, no matter how much money it gets or it dedicates to its individual military budgets, it will be able to defend itself against the United States of America or against China or against Russia? It is a myth. And we do this because in Africa now we love symbols that have no substance. The fact that you feel that, no, I'm head of state, I'm being saluted by my armies, president of Congo and stuff like that. I go to America, they welcome me on the red carpet and stuff like that. Those symbols, even though you don't have the power to make something happen, we love those symbols so much. You see, the same thing in slavery. When you have a group of slaves that are being oppressed, or that is being oppressed by people, by the slave master, all they can dream of is to become like a master. But because they don't have the power to become like a master, at least they must try to cover themselves with the symbols that represent the power and authority of their master. That's a reality. You see, they must try to speak the language of the master. They must try to portray themselves like their master because he is the only model. And that's reality in Africa today. We have head of states who don't have the power to change the reality of Africa, but they're still trying to portray themselves as if they have the power. The only power they have is to oppress their people, but not to change the reality of our continent. I'm not wrong to say this. It's, unfortunately, is the truth and is the reality that we are facing. So unity is very important. We must unite our money to build what we want, what can give us a collective power so that we can defend ourselves against our enemy or our enemies. Because now we have Chinese on the list and Arabs are coming also. So the biggest threats facing African race is disorganization. You see, when we talk about unity, we talk about organization. So as far as we are disorganized, we are disunited, because talking about unity is organization. So we need to organize our resources. You see, it has been reported that in America, for example, black people buy more Mercedes-Benz than the white people, even though they don't have the same level of economy as the white community. Why? Can you imagine if we bring all this money? Let's say, for example, I have the possibility to buy an expensive Mercedes-Benz, but instead of doing that, I buy a small car and I take the remaining budget, I put it together with other black people who do the same thing so that we can build our own industry, our automobile industry. It's possible, very possible. If you count how many cars, expensive cars black people have, just drive through, for example, South Africa, you see how many expensive cars, how many Germany-made brands of cars that we have, Lamborghini stuff, you name them. So if we can just cut in half, buy a comfortable car, and we put this money together, this is what we call organization. And this threat of disorganization is what keeps us in the conditions where we are today. And this means the second word is that African unity means nothing if it is not about organizing our little resources for meaningful ends. Yes, the end that we are aiming for is the liberation and emancipation of Africa. And for us to achieve that, we need to begin today organizing our resources to achieve or to get to that ends. So this is number 2 as a principle of Pan-Africanism, unity. And I'm going to go quickly now to finish. The number 3 is solidarity. We must be in solidarity with one another. African people have been showing much solidarity to other people than they're showing to themselves. I do remember in 2015 when there was a terrorist attack in France that killed some journalists there. I could see that all our status on WhatsApp, on Facebook were changed, especially the French-speaking Africa, which is more alienated than the English-speaking. All of us were changing our status to say, I'm now Charlie Hebdo, which was actually the news media that was bombed, that was attacked by terrorists. We were all declaring ourselves that I'm now French Charlie Hebdo. But at the same time, there were African people killed in Somalia, African people dying in Ethiopia, African people dying in the Congo, 20 million now. African people are dying currently in Mali. African people are dying right currently in Burkina Faso, in Central Africa, in Sudan. What solidarity are we showing to these African, our brothers, our bloods, our genes? What kind of solidarity are we showing to them? None. It's like there's nothing that is happening, because it takes us back to the beginning. We don't value our life. We don't give worth to our existence. Whatever happened to us, well, he's an African. When it happens to a white person, it's a tragic, it's a tragic event. When this church in France, this cathedral church in France, what's the name again? Well, when it was burned down, I think in 2 or 3 years back, I saw African leaders really moved by that church. Some of them donated them thousands, or some of them even millions, to reconstruct that church, really. But when an African country is bombed, what do we do? So there's no solidarity. So you see, we need to build solidarity among ourselves and to support ourselves. Look, in your community, every morning, when you go to buy bread, to whom are you buying that bread? Because now it becomes a custom. Every African community has been kind of invaded by Arabs, or I don't know, Pakistanis shops and stuff like that. So in the same communities, you will find our African, shops, our African brothers with shops and stuff like that, selling breads, sugars. Where do you go to buy? So we must show solidarity. This is the another principle of Pan-Africanism. Solidarity is very important. It will help us to go far. You see, the Jewish community is respected because they are working in solidarity. You go to a Jewish doctor, if you have a headache, but you have another problem with your teeth, he's not going to recommend you to another person, but to another Jew doctor or Jewish doctor. See, so it is like that. We cannot expect to build strong community if we are not working in solidarity. So solidarity is the key, very important. And here we say we must stand for one another. We must develop the means of collaboration and mutual supports. A threat to one African is a threat to all Africans. It's very important. This is all about solidarity. The next principle of Pan-Africanism is African self-determination. So this stands as everything that needs to be done for Africa must be done by Africans. At this moment, there is no longer a European solution to the African problem. You see, for a long time, we have been hoping that one day European people will change their mind and then consider how much they've been oppressing us, how much they've destroyed Africa, and have compassion, and then begin to do something good for us. That is why sometimes we see our leaders going to the UN General Assembly, go to China, Africa, summits to ask for favor of the people who have built their wealth depending on your oppression. It's not going to happen. For more than 500 years, the Western society has been sustaining itself by exploiting Africa. So it is really, it is out of mind to think that these people will suddenly and willingly stop oppressing you to give you a chance to undermine their own comfortability, economic development, which they have been able to get out of your oppression and exploitation. So we must understand that every solution, any solution, small or big, that Africa needs must be done by Africans. We don't have to rely on other people for them to do for us what we are supposed to do for ourselves. That is what the African self-determination means. We must be in the forefront of any struggle or activity that promises the change we want. There is no European solution to the African problem. And I will end by saying that we must begin to do for ourselves what others have been doing for us, have been pretending to do for us. You see, I'm always saying that Africa can change tomorrow. The situation of Africa can change in 1 year. It can change in 5 years. It can change in 10 years. It can change in 100 years. And guess what? It may not also change. It may never also change, because it depends on one single thing, which is the moment that African people will realize that it is now time to do for ourselves what other people have been pretending to do for us. That is the day of African liberation and African emancipation. The reality today is because we're still having leaders who go into power hoping that there's a FME, there's a IMF, there is a World Bank, and I'm going to go and borrow money to do 1, 2, 3. And that money always hunt us down, because it's the blood of poor people that pay back that loan. We don't have leaders who look at themselves and say, okay, we must be in the forefront of this struggle, and anything that must be done for Africa must be done by Africans. Self-determination. So if you are an aspiring leader in Africa, in your colonial enclosure, or in the business world, because business politics work together, you must understand that only self-determination will help us to do for ourselves what other people have been pretending to do for us. And in that pretendency, they have been dominating us ever since. Now, the last principle that I want to discuss is the principle of relatedness, African relatedness. This is very important because it brings us back to the first principle of identity, whereby we see the affliction or of solidarity is actually wraps up everything. When we see the affliction of an African person in Ethiopia, in Somalia, we don't feel attached or affected by that affliction. We feel somehow far away from them or from their situation, while we are all related. This means that your condition in Ghana, my condition in Central Africa, the condition of another African in Southern Africa are the same and related. You see? So, for you to understand this, let me tell you this. You see, a Chinese person cannot be treated the same way that the African person is treated in the world. Why? Because people, first of all, realize that he is a Chinese person. And if I do something wrong to this person, China will ask, questions, will demand accountability, from whoever is responsible for maybe the killing or the destruction of a Chinese citizen. But when it comes to Africa, it's easy to destroy an African person because there is an entity that will ask the accountability, that will ask questions about an African person that has been killed. So it means that the conditions of the Africa as a continent reflect directly the conditions of every African person in the world. So it means if Africa as an entity, as a continent, is weak and destroyed, so is every African person in the world. You cannot expect to be respected, to be strong, and to be estimated in anyhow you think if Africa is underestimated, if Africa is disrespected, if Africa is weak and destroyed. The only way to make ourselves strong is to make sure that the Africa as a continent that represents all of us is strong and powerful. You see, even Obama, can you imagine that he was treated as a monkey while he was the president of the United States of America, simply because Africa does not have that power that reflects itself into the African people worldwide. When you print yourself to any airport today with a British passport, already the fact that you show a British passport, you represent certain power behind you. Or the American passports, they respect you because there is a power that stands behind you. But when you go with the Congolese passport, what does it mean anyway? When you go with the, Uganda passport, what does it mean? When you go with the Kenyan passport, what does it mean? Nothing. They can treat you the way they want. So we must understand that as Africa goes, so do all African people. If Africa goes strongly, all of us will be strong people in the world and respected. Therefore, it is time, everything that I've spoken here concern Africa. It's time to rebuild Africa as a global power base. And if you have come to know what is ACUP and its vision, you will understand, or you will realize that this is what we are pursuing, because the vision of ACUP is to rebuild Africa as a global power base. Nothing much, nothing less, nothing more. Because only when Africa has been rebuilt as a global power base, we will have that kind of respect that we need in the world, that kind of dignity that we need in the world. But as long as Africa is a playground of Chinese, of the Americans, sometimes of the Arabs, of the Indians, of the Russians, every African person in the world will be but a tool that other people must use for their own gain and their own economic advancement. I hope this is much clear, and I want you to really take time to think about these principles and to think about some more principles that we can add on this list, because they are endless, right, as far as African liberation and emancipation is concerned. Thank you very much for your time and for your dedication. It was worth it discussing this lengthy presentation. Our commitment is to rebuild Africa as a global power base. And to do that, we need to rebuild African man and African woman himself as a strong person, as strong people in the world. And the journey to that establishment of an African person as a strong people in the world, or a strong person in the world rather, is through education. That is why we're giving the best of ourselves. We make sure that we come as clear as possible, even though this English is not our first language, but unfortunately is the only means that we have now to communicate with our brothers across the world. So thank you very much for your time. If you want to get more involved in the ACUP, our doors are open. We want people to work with, as I've explained from the beginning. This journey is not a journey of one person. This is a bottom-up revolution. This is a people's revolution. Only when we understand that and come together and work, we have a better chance of survival out of this 21st century. We must understand that we are at a time of danger, but it is also a time of opportunity, because danger and opportunity always walk together. We just have to flip on the other side of the coin and realize that we have opportunities. And these opportunities are what we are doing right now, uniting ourselves using the very same tools that the Western have built to exploit us, such as Facebook, YouTube, and stuff like that, to propagate our message of liberation and emancipation, and to mobilize our people and to come together and build this agenda of revolution of African people that we call the ACUP. Thank you very much for your time. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on the streets or on Facebook. This revolution is in the mind. My name is King Kabbalah, member of the African Continental Unity Party. Freedom and light, peace and decolonization. We see you for the next lecture. Thank you very much. Until then, peace and power.